All right, so this is the Dossier podcast with Jordan Schachtel. Today we have our guest Parker Thayer. Parker works as an investigative researcher for the Capital Research Center. He's a graduate of Hillsdale College, which a lot of our readers absolutely love and adore, and we need more of them. Parker, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to bring you on, especially because you recently had a really viral series of posts about this organization called Humans First that we've covered in the dossier, basically as an Astroturf organization started by these leftists in San Francisco who are now masquerading as a conservative organization, and their chief goal is to stop the build out of American technological infrastructure. Parker, what did you find out recently about Humans First?
Yeah, so I mean, it all kind of started. There was this Axios story that ran about it, and the Axios headline was essentially "Conservative Organization Plans Nationwide Protest," and immediately right there, that was a huge red flag to me. We're conservatives. Most of us are employed gainfully. Generally speaking, the conservative movement does not engage in organized nationwide protests. That sounds a lot like the tactics that the left use, things like No Kings and the BLM movement and etc. So I was immediately suspicious of the headline. I dug around and found out this organization was called Humans First, which, catchy name, credit to them. That's a great, catchy name. Something I do support. Humans should be first. I don't know who exactly we would be putting humans second to. Apparently they think computers don't serve human beings, I guess. But the name is Human First, and they had some amount of clout. They had board members who had long roots in the conservative movement. But I was still suspicious. And then I one of the common tricks I'll use when I'm doing investigating groups, which is kind of what I do for a living, oftentimes their websites will have privacy policies. Surprisingly, Humans First was not so gifted with computers. They forgot to censor their privacy policy. In the privacy policy, it showed that they were selling everybody's email information and thus working with a common, very far left political organizing consultant known as the Action Network. Basically, I think I described it on Twitter as Act Blue for left-wing nonprofits instead of PACs. Any organization working with the Action Network, the Action Network does not, for context, they don't work with conservative organizations. They are a left-only shop. They don't cross the aisle like that. So in order to get a connection with the Action Network and start, working with them and being their client, you've got to be affiliated with the progressive movement, which immediately made me suspicious of this whole Humans First organization. Another thing I found, Twitter conveniently, or now X, conveniently lets you see account information for this Humans First group. They had a great little post announcing their nationwide protest, and it was a picture of a attractive cowgirl on a horse holding an American flag as she rode in some kind of rodeo or something like that. Very American, very, how grassroots of them. And then I checked their Twitter account information, and their account wasn't based in America. It was based in the UK. So they were neither conservative, and for some reason, their Twitter account doesn't seem to be even American. And it was a gigantic red flag. The more I looked into them, I found out other people, including yourself, had been reporting about them in the past. And it was just this gigantic, laundered left-wing influence op that seems to have co-opted a segment of the conservative movement.
Yeah, it's amazing how, it's not so easy to brand yourself as a conservative organization when you don't have any conservative people that are consulting with you, it seems. They fell into this trap. Nothing says, right-wing more than outsourcing your comms abroad to Europe and wherever else, they were hiring. I found that through their articles of incorporation, that was kind of like the key, piece that connected the puzzle, was that they were founded by an organization called the Center for AI Safety, which is, people on the West Coast that are affiliated with the effective altruism movement, which is like a very left-wing Silicon Valley
Yes.
niche tech centric, but like
Yeah,
degrowth
very familiar with
organization where
them.
they think that that the world is going to come to an end basically if we don't stop technological progress. And they
Mm.
received money from this guy, one of the Facebook co-founders named Dustin Moskowitz,
I'm
and he's
very familiar with Dustin.
yeah, I was going to say that, because of your work, I'm sure you encounter his donations all the time because
Oh yeah.
I think he was Kamala Harris is one of her biggest individual donors or bundlers.
Hmm.
But, certainly not a guy that's donating to, Mike Lee and Ted Cruz ever. Right. So,
Yeah, no, Dustin Moskowitz is one of the most underappreciated villains in the world of left wing philanthropy and also pat giving and political spending. He's one thing that people don't appreciate on the think tank side of things. Dustin Moskowitz, his money is basically the reason we have the Soros DAs. He
mhm.
has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on the very very far left, borderline communist district attorneys that have been releasing criminals in this giant revolving door. The policy organizations that prop up that entire movement, Dustin Moskowitz is the heart of that whole movement. His philanthropic endeavors have made sure that they've ruined countless American cities and probably led to the deaths of thousands of people indirectly.
Yeah,
So like
Moskowitz.
anything funded by Dustin Moskowitz should be kept at least a 10-foot pole distance from the conservative movement.
Yeah, unfortunately for the pro freedom, caucus that we're part of here, Moskowitz was a really early investor in
Mm,
Anthropic, and he's
mm,
made multiple hundreds of times over his equity, and he donated some of that equity to these nonprofit, anti-data center, anti-technology, anti-innovation organizations that are now flush with cash, but
mm,
they're trying to appeal to conservatives through these organizations called Humans First. So there's like all these guns for hire that have right wing credentials that say, like, oh, I'm the most MAGA person in the room, but I'm willing
mm,
to get paid off by San Francisco liberals because, they have all this Anthropic stock and they have a lot of cash. So people take the cash. And now we have this thing coming up on July 18th that I'm not sure if you're familiar with. They're doing a countrywide data center protest, and they released these organizer toolkits, all these booklets, like very sophisticated organized operation.
mm-hmm.
And it seems that the goal to me is just that they want to shut down the construction of every new data center in the United States, no matter where it is. They're bad. AI is bad. It's going to lead to the end of the world, and we need to stop it. And as a result, it's like this like radical degrowther movement that has emerged,
Mm-hmm.
and popularized by some of these right, yeah, at least like plausibly right wing commentators who I think have clearly been bought off by this organization and similar organizations. But when we talked before the show that you're doing some new research with the Capital Research Center, specifically on like these kind of like astroturf organizations that are popping up with the left. Can you speak to that a little more?
Yeah. So like what's happening now, I am a person who understands more than most like the objections that people might have to AI data centers. I can understand why people would be scared of them. It's a new technology, and new technologies can sometimes be scary. The problem is that the information, a lot of the people that, especially in the conservative movement, who are and the more populist wing of it, that are starting to oppose these data centers, the information they've been getting is wrong. And we were trying to look into, who's putting out this information, where is this information coming from? And what we found was, and we'll have a report on this hopefully later this week if we can keep the timeline up. There's without giving too much away, there's a organization known as the Courier Newsroom, which was started as a Democratic PAC. And what they did was they would raise money from very powerful donors, people like George Soros and et cetera. would give Courier Newsroom money, and Courier Newsroom created what looked like local news outlets, state-based news outlets. And then once they had gotten the money, they would start running, they would run a couple normal stories, things to make them look real, things to, get the audience engaged. And then there would be politics. It'd be, 2 stories on, a local sports team, and then another story on the Democratic candidate. 2 stories on, some kind of national parks thing, and then another story attacking the Republican candidate. And that's how Courier Newsroom got started. Eventually, they transitioned away from being a PAC because PACs have some amount of disclosure, and it's a lot easier to run your, gun for hire fake newspaper operation if you don't have to disclose who's giving you the money. So now they're a for-profit company, and there's very complicated structure behind them. But basically, we've discovered that Courier Newsroom across numerous different states at a very large scale with numerous different articles has been running like an anti-data center, supposedly local news, fear-mongering concern campaign. And it seems like this entirely fabricated fake grassroots Astroturf info operation is kind of starting to penetrate the conservative movement, and just feed a whole bunch of bad information to people who are good, reliable conservatives, but maybe just have some concerns, and then those concerns are stoked into a full scale hysteria by some bad information from left-wing actors with bad intentions.
Yeah, that's my biggest problem with this whole movement that we're seeing, this AstroTurf movement, whether it's through these protest groups, some of which have roots in Shanghai through the Neville Singham network, like Code Pink and Party for Liberation and Socialism, and Democratic Socialists. A lot of that money is coming from abroad, but as you pointed out, that there's also just like left-wing groups funding fake news just to try to manufacture hysteria and get politicians. And I think what makes our job harder as people that are seeking the truth is that you have politicians that feel the need to respond to that hysteria and and make pledges while they're running for office that, oh, we're going to ban this stuff, but their information is also based off of nonsense. So it creates like this death spiral of misinformation, and we can't have. I think that the problem is that people are free to have their opinions, attend these town halls, protest, whatever you want. But when the information is rooted in nonsensical, like hysteria-inducing information, it's impossible to have that conversation. And I think, I don't know if this is your perspective, but it seems to me that they don't really want Americans to have this conversation, because I don't think that they honestly believe that, much of the hard truth is on their side at this point.
Yeah, no, it's their movement has transitioned to, and this is, a classic left-wing tactic. This is one of the ways that we ended up saddled with Obamacare back in the day, was they would create this, what appeared to be an enormous, public front of support by propping up group after group after group, news outlet after news outlet, all of these supposedly grassroots organizations that, are opposed to or in support of this policy or that policy. And they'll have very punchy reasons for supporting this or proposing this policy that'll generate headlines. They'll get people, they sound reasonable at first, and then if you think about it too hard, then all of a sudden it doesn't quite make as much sense. This is exactly how we've gotten a wide variety of left-wing policies have been kind of forced upon us, because that once you create that impression of broad grassroots support, suddenly people want to be part of it, and they start buying the lines, buying the lies from these organizations. So yeah, it is a big, and this is exactly what the left sets out to create on these data centers and on numerous other policies that they've been fighting on for a long time, including things like opposing nuclear energy.
Right.
That's another one of those populist policies that somehow has some amount of support among conservatives, because there's been so much fear mongering about nuclear energy based on bunk information for a long time that's been put out by these left-wing groups, and so the conservatives oppose it, even though they're not realizing that they've been lied to by left-wing groups. So it's a
Yeah.
classic left-wing tactic that we've seen on Obamacare and on nuclear energy and on emission standards and all kinds of things over the years.
Nuclear is really the cautionary tale here. This is
Mhm.
how we can be set back enormously.
Mhm.
One of the big issues with building the data centers is that they have to supply their own power because our grid is so inefficient because of the anti-nuclear, organizational campaigns that have been going on for 50 years or even more now, where America basically froze, self-immolated its own nuclear program. And we see this still happening in Europe. And I think that there's been a great resurgence in interest, especially, on the venture capital and entrepreneurial side in, modular nuclear or smaller nuclear or just, robust nuclear energy programs, because we're going to need that to supply the grid. But I think what's happening
Mhm.
is that these data center operators are finding themselves in a really tough spot. They have to bring their own energy to power their data centers, and sometimes that can come from like gas
Mhm.
turbines, right, and stuff that might make a lot of noise instead of just hooking up right to the grid. So imagine if they were able to install like little modular nuclear reactors on site. I think that would be a huge win for the
Mhm.
whole movement, but we're so far behind where we should be in America today because of basically a bunch of fake news about the dangers of nuclear. And nuclear is like the
Yeah.
safest and cleanest energy possibly available and the most efficient. So it's just
Mhm.
like so absurd that we saw what these campaigns could do. You point to one meltdown where, or like a semi meltdown where there were actually no casualties at all, but like the news will just like panic, 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 and you have these kind of like leftists fueling the fire. So,
Yeah.
is that kind of what you're seeing with the modern anti, data center movement?
Yeah. I mean, they've, to their credit, they have gotten out ahead of the data center industry. In a way that we haven't seen like a coordinated operation from the left like this in a long time. And it's partially, most likely, it's because the left politically is in such dire straits. They're trying to
Mm.
capitalize and kind of find a way into the more populist right leaning movement. They think that they maybe have found some easy marks there, and that they'll be able to pull away some of those voters and activists to their cause. So yeah, and like you mentioned with nuclear energy, the consequences of the long running environmentalist campaign against nuclear energy, while also promoting things like wind and solar that just aren't nearly as efficient as nuclear energy, um, and oftentimes are actually more dangerous somehow, which is an almost unbelievable stat, but it seems to be true. Um, the consequences of that have been enormous. It has set us back as a country in an amount that's almost impossible to calculate. We could be using magic rocks to boil water to create spin
Mhm.
turbines and power our entire country with zero emissions, round the clock, as much power as we need, more power than we currently produce by a very, very wide margin. Um, but those groups stopped us from doing that. The consequences of that are almost impossible to calculate. We have to think the same way when you're approaching these data centers. Let's say that they're only partially right. Let's say that they are somehow right. But let's say that they're partially right about the data centers. Even if they are partially right and that there are some concerns here or there, what is the long run cost of them being wrong about the whole, about data centers being enormously valuable economic assets, that AI technology being enormous to the future of national security and the future of, even if it's not relevant to national security, the future of the economy as a whole. Um, the costs of that, of being a little bit wrong about that, are so much larger in the long run than the costs of being a little bit right about data centers and saying that maybe they are spiking electricity costs. The long term cost of being a little bit wrong is so much larger than the long term cost of being totally right. Even
Yeah,
so,
I don't know about you, but it seems to me like it's a continuation of the climate narrative, or like a
Hmm.
respinning of the climate narrative. It's like in a very similar category where with the climate narrative, it's like the world's coming to an end and we need to institute, I mean, this is like the far left, like the Bernie Sanders AOC. And they
Hmm.
openly said basically that we need to stop building, stop innovating, stop, the construction industry, stop coal mining, you stop reliable energy. We need to use, solar, wind, and we need to just like roll back everything. And I think
Yeah.
that this is a very similar movement, but just with different branding.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And we talked about how the left politically is kind of in dire straits. The environmental movement is in worse shape of all of the left's, all of the various causes they champion. The environmental movement is worse off than any of them. People simply do not care about the insane, their insane fear mongering anymore. They're having a hard time affording gas. They certainly aren't going to, take time out of their day to go and protest for policies that will create higher gas prices for them. Um, so they're reaching for this, concerns about AI data centers. They reached for them. They stoked that little tiny, little concerns into this huge fire of hysteria because they are, the left is a drowning man right now, especially the environmental movement. They have nothing. They have nothing and no one to go to at the moment. All of their predictions have turned out to be wrong. People have rejected their policies. So yeah, it is absolutely. It's not just an extension of this environmental movement. It's like one of their, the crazy decarbonization cult's last gasp in a way.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny when I was before this show, I was going over the humans first. They have like this toolkit and organizer
Mm-hmm.
kit. And I think that it's funny that they want to shut everything down because, I'm pretty familiar with using ChatGPT, using Claude by Anthropic, using Grok, and I can tell that these toolkits were designed with AI. I'm 100% certain because it has like these specific font patterns that I'm sure you're familiar with,
Mm.
and that, like they barely edited some of the language. So it's like, okay, so you want to shut this stuff down, but you're going. I mean, I almost like respect the guerrilla tactics, but also recognize the absurdity of using the technology to demand that technology is shut down. It reminds me of like one of these like, like the infamous example, like the BDS movement against Israel, where
Mm-hmm.
Israel's like, contributed to all of this technological advancement, and they're like using like, their iPhones to like tweet out stuff when it's like, like 10% of the components were, Israeli inventions. But it's just like, it's absurd to see like these anti data center groups knowingly or unknowingly coordinating using the AI from the companies that they want to stop innovating. And it's just like, at what point like does it become just like so entirely absurd? I was going through this list of like, they have like a long list of why data centers are bad, and I think they have a long list because like you can't debunk 50 different things at once. And towards the
Mm-hmm.
end of the list, it actually said, and I can pull up the screenshot for in the show notes. They said that you shouldn't live near one because they're valuable military targets, meaning like a foreign adversary might bomb a data center. So you should argue to your town council that we shouldn't have it should be a NIMBY situation for that too. So it's like they're just like throwing everything at the wall, seeing if it sticks. But like this is the
Absolutely.
environment that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and it is throw it at the wall, see what sticks is a perfect a perfect description because, like we said, they're trying to capitalize off of and try and leech off of the conservative movement. And as left wing commentators, a lot of them have they don't understand conservative value structures. They don't understand. They have no theory of the conservative mind. A lot of them,
Mm-hmm.
and this has been the case for many years on the left. Since even before 2016, they couldn't fathom how a conservative thinks, and that a
Like I can
conservative
I
is
can
not.
show you these co-founders. I bet you they do not know anyone in their social circles who's like remotely right wing. I mean, not the co-founders that are listed on the website, but the ones in the articles of incorporation
Mm-hmm.
who, went to schools on the West Coast and are like part of that like Silicon Valley, like the pause AI movement. Like they literally do not know people that are even like remotely right wing or centrist.
Yeah.
Like they're all like-minded.
Yeah, and that's why it looks like they're kind of just spitballing. They're trying to come up with
Right.
whatever's going to fool these conservatives, because they don't understand. They don't a lot of them don't deal with conservatives. The consultants they're hiring don't deal with conservatives. They have no frame of reference for how to communicate with them, or what arguments might be appealing or unappealing to them. So they're just trying everything and waiting for people in the conservative populist movement to pick up on something. And now that they've picked up on things like they've seen that some conservative minded populist people have cited things like job losses to AI, and things like water contamination and electricity grid costs. They figured out what works, and now they're taking that bone and running with it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wanted to, appreciate your rundown on all of these elements. So I've been following your X account for quite some time, and what I find is that, as someone kind of who came up doing a lot of open source research and finding interesting things, I
Nice.
see that you also possess that talent, and uh, it's very interesting to see you kind of like how your thought process works with how you're finding and categorizing information and educating the public. If you were to give, aspiring journalists any tips about how to kind of like, there's so many people in DC that want to work in these systems, whether it's through nonprofits, whether it's
Mhm.
through, for-profit, right of center, left of center, just the news type organizations. What advice can you give to journalists to kind of like break out from that clump of people who are just like churning out aggregation and have nothing new to offer?
Sure. I mean, the nonprofit sector is just this enormous pile of breaking news stories, influence, scandal stories. It's an enormous portion of the economy, with more, it has a lot more public disclosures than any other. If you just sniff around in the nonprofit sector, that's what I started doing. That's how I, learned my orientation, and kind of figured out how money flows in DC work. I started with the nonprofits, and then learned the PACs, and then, from and went out from there. Um, you know, Research the nonprofit sector. Just pick any cause, any issue. Look into the nonprofits that are, engaged in policy battles or community organizing or whatever it is, in one specific sector that you're interested in. You will find a story like it's there. It's not even really a question. There are stories there that have been sitting in public, maybe for a couple months, maybe for a couple years. I'm a person who knows more about money and politics flows, and dark money groups and whatever you want to call it, than I think most. And every single year, there'll just be a new $80 million plus, budget per year organization that pops up that I had no idea existed. And sometimes they've existed for many years without me knowing that they existed. So that would be my suggestion. Start with the nonprofit sector. It is the nonprofit sector is really where American politics moves from. It's the tail that wags the dog, particularly for the left.
Yeah. So in terms of like your process, because I can see you have a unique talent for this space for uncovering information. Like, how do you? I guess like we have this. I think there's this misconception. We're in this age of AI where
Mm.
information is infinite. So you would think that like it would be difficult for people outside of these, technological applications to find new information, but you're constantly finding new information. So what's kind of like your thought process behind like how to get to that new information? Because like
hmm
I get asked this question from journalists quite a bit, and they struggle. They're like, do you Google? Do you X search? Are you using
Mm.
chat to do it? Like what? Give us a little insight
Yeah,
into your
sure.
process.
So, shameless plug here. We have a website called Influence Watch, where it's like Wikipedia for money and politics and groups that are trying to influence policy. Um, Definitely recommend. We have a lot of new data tools that we've developed now, so that will automate collection of information on the largest, donors to a group. You'll be able to find like the top 20 of them there, for any nonprofit, and groups that nonprofit has also given money to. So lots of great information there. But I mean, the biggest thing usually, my process is starting with, you observe something, you get, create, if you're interested in a specific thing, create a dummy social media account and just like a whole bunch of things related to that thing. And you'll start getting ads. You do it across a couple different platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X, or whatever, even Blue Sky. And you'll start getting ads, and ads are always a great spot to start. Also, you'll start seeing news articles and activists and policy experts that work for nonprofits that say things that, one of either these ads or the policy experts or the articles, they'll say something, you'll be like, hey, that's an odd, like, why did they say that? It's a suspicious, very specific thing to say. And from there, you can start you find something, you look into the money behind it. Usually there will be a story there. You can find a donor with, clearly, misaligned reasons for funding a thing, selfish reasons, reasons to lie, etc. So that's a good start. But then the next part, people underestimate how willing organizations that are influencing policy in nefarious ways, and just kind of being crassly astroturf and manipulative. Most of these, they'll just say it on their website. Like, just look at what they publish on their website.
That was going to be my follow-up. I was like, just go to their grant page and you'll find some crazy stuff that hasn't been reported for whatever reason. But like, they're just kind of updating it on their own, right? But people aren't actually going to the site and finding the information.
Yeah, exactly. Like they'll have grant databases, all kinds of stuff like that. And particularly on the left, these, the people who work in the nonprofit sector of the left, they have no frame of reference for what is a normal political belief, because they've grown up in such an isolated, far left bubble that they'll just admit things, crazy, insane things that you couldn't torture out of me. They'll just admit these things about their motivations and what they're up to. And what their plans are and policies they support on their website, and not really think twice about it, and mainly not think twice about it because there are not many people looking into these types of organizations and campaigns and etc. So the stories are just kind of sitting there a lot of the time.
Yeah, I wrote a piece last month, about this effective altruist grant making system for reporters. And they offer amazing incentives for, they never specifically say it on their website that, they want you to be directionally biased to promote their ideology, but they have like a board that, will dish out the grants for specific stories. If you land them in NBC, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, and reporters, I think, are getting on average like $8,000-9,000. So it's like significant money, when you're a salaried reporter at, I don't know, like, NBC News making like $80K, and you're now working with these effective altruists on the side to land stories that like are within your ideological framework anyway. And then, you're constantly just like promoting that stuff. It was actually interesting that when I wrote the initial stories about Humans First, NBC News covered it, and the reporter himself was one of these like fellows that was funded by an effective altruist aligned organization. And of course, didn't like, they disclose it in like one sentence at the bottom. They're like, oh yeah, he's a reporter at the Tarbell Center. We're like, what's the Tarbell Center? So you got to like look into that. And it's like, oh yeah, so it's an effective altruist grant making organization. So like, clearly there's going to be giant bias here. But it's really interesting that, just like specifically as you're talking about, like on their website, they tell you like what stories they've funded, right? And I think that what's interesting, if you want to speak to this, in this age of AI, and Influence Watch, by the way, been using it as a resource for a long time, it's a terrific resource, has Has AI like helped your organization? I imagine it's been made it so much easier to like categorize and use your databases like super efficiently.
Yeah, definitely. I'm no expert at large data projects, but for example, when I was looking at recent stories on like Medicaid fraud and et cetera, AI tools for database management and finding suspicious trends in disbursement patterns and et cetera. Like all, it's extremely useful. It's also Influence Watch, for example, appears in a decent number of those AI data summaries when you search things on Google. If you search who funds this group, there's an above average chance that Influence Watch will appear in those, which is very useful. So it's the conservative movement, I think, will benefit enormously from more people knowing more information and knowing the truth, because that's the side the conservative movement is on, is the side of truth. And if AI is able to help people discover that and learn about it more easily at a larger scale, it's only going to benefit our movement going forward.
Yeah, and I think we have to participate more in the conversation because, like, there are reports saying that, these AI models are being trained with like too much
Hmm.
left-wing information. And I think Grok is a unique case because it's more, has a truth-seeking mandate. And I hope that Grok
Yeah.
is also always part of, people's inquiries. But I think the best way to, motivate these, technology companies to facilitate fairness and truth and also include our perspective is to use these tools and get involved and not just like hand wave it away as like some leftist project. Like at the end of the day, it's
Hmm.
really just software, right? And the people that are doing the inputs are super valuable.
Yeah.
But we need to find a way, I think, to influence them more to, at least have our perspective. And I think, some of these companies are doing a good job. It's a very robust, competitive environment right now. What are you seeing in, with your organization in terms of like that dynamic? Or is there a specific like, series of tools that you're using? Like, are you using like ChatGPT or Claude or Grok, or is it just kind of like anyone, like organizationally, has there been any guidance in terms of like what you're supposed to be doing?
It's definitely been a thing we've considered. I personally, I'll use Chat GPT quite a bit if I'm, just to find, initial stages of research. If I encounter a group I don't know about, I could Google it and, go through their website, and often I do.
Yeah.
But sometimes, if it's a project I discover, as often happens, I'll discover an organization that I haven't heard of before while looking into another group, and maybe I want to keep on that group. I can task, an AI to come up with like, a little dossier on their activities, maybe who's funding them, and usually it'll be able to find information like that pretty, pretty easily and with a good degree of accuracy. So
Mhm.
it's, you know, it's definitely something we're considering using more of.
Yeah. So Parker, you're a graduate of Hillsdale College. I spoke at, I forgot the name of the symposium again, a couple of years back. It was a great time. It's an amazing campus.
Mm.
Did Hillsdale do a lot for you in terms of jumpstarting your career? And did
Oh
you,
yeah.
what do you have to like? I think that especially it's not just, it's not just like conservative politics school.
Hmm.
I think there's very high academic achievement there. And it's a
Very.
really interesting place to visit. I highly recommend it. How was your experience at Hillsdale?
It was incredible. I think one of my favorite stories. I think, uh, let's see, I had one, two, three, four. I think I had, yeah, I had five groomsmen in my wedding were from Hillsdale. The biggest thing you'll find at Hillsdale is you'll find your people. You'll find, like-minded conservative people who are extremely intelligent and are going to succeed in life. The best type of friends to have. And like you said, Hillsdale does well across the board. It's not just conservative politics. I have, I think, four friends who are already on their, already placed in their residencies for becoming doctors. Hillsdale has a great STEM program. needs some computer engineering. Some donors should talk to Hillsdale about that, getting students working with AI and coding and computers and etc. Computer science would be an awesome thing for Hillsdale to start doing. But it's enormously. It'll teach you to think. It'll teach you to write well. It'll teach you the research that I do. I wouldn't be able to do if it hadn't been for Hillsdale professors teaching me how to do research in academic and literary context. That those skills translated to a journalism. I unfortunately didn't get to take the journalism classes at Hillsdale. It's probably my biggest regret, but they have an amazing journalism program there for people who want to learn more about journalism, like you mentioned before. Try and get into Hillsdale. God, John Miller's classes are amazing. There are a lot of great journalists that he's taught, so definitely keep Hillsdale on your list there. You can only minor in journalism, not major, but you shouldn't major in journalism. You should major in something else and learn journalism as a skill to talk
I agree.
about.
By the way, I have multiple useless degrees in international relations. So I basically didn't really have a specific agenda going into college, and I just wanted to learn. And I think, but like learning in general is just like helpful. And I agree that I think the best journalists don't have journalism degrees for whatever reason. I understand there's a lot of value in like you learn production, communication, media skills, but I think the best journalists kind of like have like this natural instinct that can't it can be shaped a little bit, but you can't really teach people how to do groundbreaking, unique work. They just like have to have it, and if they don't have it, they can like choose another profession. But I think that as you can have infinite degrees and certifications in journalism, and you can still be a ridiculous like Jim Acosta level hack who's actually doing amazingly well on Substack. We're seeing on Substack now all of these like washed up cable news hosts are going to Substack, and their audience at like CNN or whatever is coming with them, and they're doing amazingly well. I don't understand why that's happening or why people can't see through it, or maybe it's just like infotainment, because we live in this infotainment era. But yeah, back to Hillsdale. I think a lot of schools are trying to replicate this model. At University of Austin, Texas, there's a lot of money behind it. I'm not sure how that's going. They're getting off the ground. It seems to be good so far. In Florida, I've heard conversations about, trying to start the next Hillsdale. So clearly there's something working there. Basically in every organization in Washington, D.C., especially right of center organizations, you'll have 1, 2, 3 Hillsdale graduates. So, there's an amazing pipeline. Clearly there's a lot of value to your education there. And, for like, parents and grandparents that are like, you want to encourage their kids to have, a successful and lucrative career. Like I couldn't recommend it enough. Like enough of these liberal arts schools in the Northeast that are, transforming people into, insane asylum patients. It's just like, we need so many more Hillsdales that it's not even a revolutionary approach to education. I'd say it's just like a traditional approach to education, right?
Yes. No, it is the approach to education that we used for most of human history and then suddenly decided to stop using. And like one thing I'll caution parents against, there's an approach, there are 3 approaches to education right now that are kind of dominating. There's like you mentioned, the Northeast, the liberal arts schools that are brainwashing your children. You don't want your kids going there. You also, on the other hand, don't want your kids going to a school that's going to teach them nothing about how to be a good person, the good, the true, and the beautiful. That's what makes Hillsdale amazing. If you skip all of that, you might end up with a kid who's competent but not well-rounded, and maybe lands a successful career but doesn't end up being a successful person. Their family life might fall apart. Their faith life might fall apart. You need competency, and you need a well-rounded person. And Hillsdale will provide you the skills to be a well-rounded person. The competency will follow. You will start to dominate whatever career you go into if you go to Hillsdale, because they teach you how to learn to do that career.
You make a great point, I think, in terms of like the like Judeo-Christian fundamentals of American society that, you know, this like secularized education system just
Hmm.
avoids entirely. I think a lot of it comes from like this like teachers union public. I mean, I'm a product of public schools, but it's like
Hmm.
that propaganda that like anything that is godly is like totally in a separate space that shouldn't
Yeah.
ever be a part of your education. And then you miss out entirely on like the moral foundations of your education. Like I understand that it's parents' ultimate responsibility to provide children with the moral foundation, but it can't hurt
Hmm.
that, you know, when they're in school growing up for, you know, 7 hours a day, and then, you know, when they want to achieve an advanced education, to also have that part of a curriculum. But I think you're right. Like that's kind of what, especially a lot of people in the right wing donor class are also missing when they're trying to
Hmm.
create something. I think that
Yes.
maybe it's a missing piece of the University of Austin, Texas curriculum. You know, it's like very
Hmm.
secularized thought, but I like appreciate the classical liberal approach to education too. But I think that
Yeah.
Hillsdale has it, you know, right on the number. As we were talking about before the show, they're, you know, the qualified applicant enrollment rate is,
Yeah.
you know, or acceptance rate is incredibly low, like entering single digits probably within the next few years. So there's so much demand for this type of education, and I think it's really going to change the game. No, Parker, like I really appreciate you coming on and having this conversation. Where can
Absolutely.
people find, you know, the work of the Capital Research Center and your personal stuff?
Yeah, like I mentioned, we run influencewatch.org, great website. Bookmark it. You'll find a use for it. If you're, especially if you're working in politics or journalism, you'll find a use for it before long. It tons of useful information curated over several years of working on that website. Also, we have capitalresearch.org. We have daily content going up across a wide range of issue areas where we research the money, the money flows behind it. We also run the Who Funds That podcast with my great coworker Mike Watson. Pretty much all of my research will end up on my Twitter feed. Or X feed. I am at Parker Thayer, so you can always find my work there as well.
Yeah, I highly recommend following Parker on X, and Influence Watch is incredibly unique. Like you'll go there and there will be information hosted on Influence Watch that is not hosted anywhere else on the internet. So follow Parker and go to Influence Watch for all the information you need on all these organizations. Parker, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.